You're listening to a Whales Are Whales production.
You're also listening to Whales.
Visit whalesorwhales.com for more projects and shows like this one.
Hello everyone, before we get going here with today's episode, this episode is actually recorded before we had changed the name from For the Love of Books to Third Person, a storytelling podcast. So if you hear us refer to it several times as For the Love of Books, or maybe even make puns about that name, just know that we're not going temporarily insane, but we actually had a different name at that point. But with all that in mind, enjoy the episode. Hello there, welcome to the inaugural episode of For the Love of Books, a podcast about our shared love for storytelling and literature. I'm your host, Bryan Kelly, and joining me today are my two co-hosts that will hopefully be sticking around for this first season and beyond. One of those is my brother and cohort in way too many projects, Steven. Hello, Steven.
Oh, hello and good day, sir. That was a pretty good intro for not having one prepared.
Yeah, I actually kind of internally panicked about halfway through, but I think I kept it going.
Oh, yeah.
I ran out of
feel a little bit
notes.
of the panic in the edge of your voice, but it kept you on your toes. Good.
Thank you. And also joining me is my good friend and aspiring writer, or if you prefer, an aspiring friend and a good writer, Abigail Inslee. Hello, Abigail.
Hello. And technically, I'm not an aspiring writer. I am a writer. I'm just aspiring to be published.
All right, so we'll go with good writer and aspiring friend then. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. It's been a good day.
Yes, I'm getting that impression.
Full of good things and magic and Pikachu.
All of these things are true. For me as well. What a coincidence.
Yeah,
it's
no
like
kidding.
the same person.
Oh, man. I share love for Pikachu.
In fact, I've never seen you and me in a room together before.
That's an excellent point. I've always wanted to do a podcast just with myself, so...
There we
Sorry,
go.
and we always had the rumors where me and you were the same person. This is getting really confusing.
Oh my gosh.
Well, speaking of confusing stuff, this marks the first time that Abigail has been a part of a Whales Are Whales production.
Yeah, actually, we've done a few test episodes for this before, but it's going to be the first published episode she's ever been a part of, and we'll get into more detailed intros soon so you can know something about this mysterious person from exotic lands.
I'm finally going to be published.
And by exotic lands, I mean like 3 hours down the highway, but hey.
You know,
that's exotic.
It's basically enough. Mexico.
Anything out of Houston is exotic to me. We've been over this.
Exactly. That Zachary from the Oriental. Yeah. And I say that he's actually going to go to Japan pretty soon. So.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so this is a podcast about books. That's fairly evident from the name, I think. But I wanted to run down kind of the format we're going to be having going forward. So we have it set up that we're going to be doing one season. And that's going to be 19 episodes total. But what those episodes are going to be is they're going to be two types. One is going to be book episodes, and what we're going to be doing for those is we're going to be reading through a book. Each one of us is going to bring one book throughout the duration of the season, and a book will be split into 3 acts. So that's 3 episodes a book. We're going to have 3 books, so it'll be a total of 9 episodes. What these episodes are going to be is we're going to read through the section of the book beforehand, and then all get together, and hopefully if you're a listener, you'll be able to get the book and read it too. And then we're going to have a discussion about what stuck out to us about this book, dissect what was good about it, what was not so good about it, any thoughts we have about it. I mean, basically, it's just a book club, but recorded. The interesting thing is while I see a lot of book club formats out there in podcasting for video games or for movies, etc., I actually don't know of many that actually just do it for books. And since we've all wanted to read more, and we all really love books, and it's just an amazing medium for podcasts because the written word can be directly translated to the spoken word, so you're not having to talk about seeing a scene. If you want to talk about something in a book, you can just directly read from it. So we thought that would be really cool, and that's going to be kind of the backbone of this podcast. But in addition to those types of episodes, the second type of episode we're going to have is a bookmark episode. That's going to happen every other episode to give us some more time to read, and also to give us a more open-ended format between the book episodes to discuss broader things in literature and in storytelling. And this can be about books, it can also be about movies, or just whatever storytelling we want to bring in, and each bookmark episode is going to have a different topic to it. So one might be about the 7-point plot structure, which is a way to look at stories and analyze them, or one might be about good endings and bad endings and so on. And we'll just bring up different topics for each bookmark episode and have a discussion on those that's more open-ended than our other episodes. And that's what this one is. This is going to be our first episode, and it's also a bookmark episode. And this one is about, well, the name of it is going to be Why the Love of Books. And that's going to be a discussion of why we're doing this podcast, why we all love books, why we all love storytelling, and also just introducing us as hosts. So, Stephen, any thoughts about that? Anything I missed in our format?
I don't think you missed anything. Very nice summary. I would like to say that the big reason I'm looking forward to having the bookmark episodes is because a lot of the time I'm enjoying stories that aren't in books. This podcast is going to be a great excuse for me to start reading more books, like you said, and that's where the meat of our discussion is going to be. But I also watch TV shows, and I also play video games, and I also make up stories of my own, and so that's going to be a nice place to put those thoughts, I suppose.
Absolutely. That's a good point, because honestly, we read some, but we have a bigger breadth. I would say our biggest breadth of storytelling comes from a combination of video games and TV shows for you and me, Stephen.
Yes, more so than movies and more so than those old-fashioned book things.
Exactly.
Well, I sure
Book,
listen to a
what's
lot
that?
book things.
Oh, what now, Stephen? What?
For the love of what?
What about you, Abigail? What is your kind of ratio of media these days in terms of where you get your storytelling?
Oh, it's hard to say. Mostly it's TV, obviously, just because it's easier than everything else.
90% Gilmore Girls, right?
It is 90% Gilmore Girls. Don't publish that on the internet. I shamelessly love Gilmore Girls. Anyways,
sure, it sounds like a good show.
It's pretty good. It's not the best thing that I've ever seen, and we'll move on from that.
Buffy is the best thing you've ever seen. You just don't know it yet.
All right. Anyways, mine's mostly movies and TV shows. Which is a problem because when I get stuck on a TV show, it's one show and there's really not much to discuss with one show. But other than that, next one would be books. I do a lot of audiobooks, because I like to listen while I work and do other things.
Absolutely. I agree.
It's pretty awesome. I would like to get more into short stories though. Like if there was one that I was missing, I feel like it's short stories because I think that's such a great medium and I just don't really read a lot that I like. So
and I
if I had one that I could add in, that's what I'd guess.
I think that's absolutely something we'll do in the podcast is instead of doing a book in 3 acts, we'll probably have one of us pick 3 short stories and go through those at some point. I think that would work in this format really well. Something else interesting that we've talked about TV shows so much is this podcast is actually originally going to be a TV show podcast.
Yes.
Before we switched it to books.
We decided that was lame.
Exactly. Hopefully, 2 weeks later we won't be like, welcome to our movie podcast. But yeah, it just shows that that's kind of where we have been a lot of the time in storytelling, and we really have a passion for that. So expect us to allude to different TV shows a lot as we're talking about fiction. And I think that'll be helpful for people who also want to get more into reading and don't necessarily have a strong background in that, to have other touchstones from other types of media to draw upon.
Exactly. To learn to tell a story, honestly, a lot of my learning has come from movies and TV shows. I read when I'm if I'm reading to learn, I'm usually learning how to use language, and can convey things through the written word. But if you're just wanting to learn a storytelling, you don't have to confine yourself to books.
Absolutely. And that's really what we love. We're just going to channel that through books.
Because they're awesome and wonderful, and they use English. And English is stupid but wonderful.
Oh, that is so true. Everything you said is so true. That's like a complete summation
of our purpose here. Yeah, and just books aren't talked that much about on the internet in the podcasting world. Not that I've been able to find. Hopefully through the show we'll find more shows like us.
Yes, I think
that's with video game music.
That's one of the reasons why I think that the book format was so appealing, is just because you look on our website and you've got your web comic and you have a podcast about music, video game music. We had a video game podcast before, but we never done a podcast about books. Nobody in our circles does books. It's forgotten about too easily.
Exactly. So jumping into our main questions here and our main topic, I want to start with kind of giving us a better introduction for each of us. So, Stephen, why don't you go ahead and give us some background on yourself, and I'm sure I'll kind of be lumped in there too.
Yeah,
kind of knowing each other for a while
here. A little bit related.
Just a little bit. We're 5% related. So go ahead.
Not
I
much
mean,
at
we're
all.
not the same person like you and Abigail, but yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting. You may be familiar with us. In fact, you probably are from our other podcasts or just from knowing us in real life.
But you
And
don't
yet
know us at all.
You don't know the real us. We we have a large,
We are Batman.
basement where we do dark rituals every evening. And when we're done with that, though,
It's 7:30.
let me start.
Speaking of which, we need to get going, Steven.
Oh, it's almost midnight.
But go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. I was born first.
Oh my gosh.
3 years before Bryan was born. That is
Yeah.
a common mistake that people make. They think we're the same age or Bryan is older. But that's not the truth at all. Kind of coming at this from a storytelling angle, ever since we were kids, we would make up stories with our action figures. We would make up characters and act
I
them
can
out.
still look at like any of our Lego minifigures and be like, oh yeah, that I remember that character. That
Oh
we
yeah,
created.
the guy with the sleeveless shirt and the blue hat, that's Jerry who worked at the pool. Like
Exactly,
like every single minifigure we had was a character, and there were dozens.
Yeah.
It's just been the way we've kind of communicated with each other and the world since the beginning, and especially since we moved at an early age. Like you were about 3 or 4, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was 3 years older than that.
Yeah.
I can't do math, as we've talked about before the show. We really learned to get along with each other. We did everything with each other.
Yes.
And so that just built up our ability to continue creating these stories and be on the same page, as it were.
Right, absolutely, because that's been something really helpful for us, is that often it's incredibly helpful to at least have one person that you can just easily collaborate with creatively.
Yes,
that can be really difficult to find someone who's on the same wavelength that way. And we just kind of had it built in through our childhood, is, we always were able to bounce creative ideas back and forth, whatever the medium was.
And so we've been extremely...
I mean, we're still doing it with podcasts.
Yeah, we're doing it at this exact moment.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
now. Yes. And so if anything, our challenge was not to find someone who could relate, was not finding someone to relate with, but it was not only relating with each other and then expanding to other people.
Exactly.
Which is one reason we wanted to do Whales or Whales, because it's so easy for us to create stuff, but we always do it alone. So now we are bringing more people in, such as Abigail. So the reason I started so early was just because I think that's kind of an important piece of our respective lives to understand.
Our love of storytelling came from as soon as we were really able to tell stories. We did.
Yes, and we didn't know we were doing that really.
No.
We were just being dumb kids. But now we're just being dumb adults. So it all works out. But anyway, we moved around the country a couple of times and eventually ended up in Houston, and we've been here in Texas for about 15-ish years.
Yep.
This is the house where we learned about, where we played video games for the first time, really. We got our first console here, which has launched us into Train Station and 8 and all kinds of wonderful friends and adventures and stories. Really, we grew up from being children to being teenagers to being adults in this same house. We still live in our parents' house because we help run the pet sitting business that we both work in.
Right.
And so in our spare time, we do Whales or Whales and a bunch of other cool stuff like that.
Yep. That about covers it.
So is that it? That's our story?
That is our story. Yes. We need to publish.
See, I just told the story. Look at that. I can't stop.
I know you so well now.
All right. So Abigail,
Yes, Bryan.
you probably have a story.
Nah.
No,
I just showed up one day.
Yeah, she's only like 3 years old.
She's just
I
a
know.
side character. We haven't written her background yet.
Beautiful. Yes.
Exactly.
I am the hero of my own story, Stephen.
All right,
So
I'll give that to you.
where
Yes.
did your love of storytelling come from? How's that kind of developed for you?
I'm not actually sure. I remember when I was a kid. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't know it until looking back. But storytelling has been a huge part of my childhood. My dad used to read us The Hobbit at night. Me and my siblings. He would sit down and he was reading The Hobbit, and I honestly do not remember this. I just remember that he did it. And a lot of my dad is a very big movie guy, so family TV time was a big thing. My mom very much encouraged reading and writing. When I was in first grade, I ended up, entering a competition for the first time, for reading and, for writing and drawing, because I was much more of an artist back then.
Yeah.
But I think, looking back, I think that's where I really discovered my love of storytelling, because I created an entire little book, and I was in first grader. It was awesome.
Wow.
And that just kind of continued. When I was in ninth grade, I discovered NaNoWriMo, which, for those of you who don't know, is National Novel Writing Month. It's a challenge every November where you are challenged to write 50,000 words in 30 days. And I thought, hey, let's do this. And I did, and I completed it, and I continued for 5 years after that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, doing that every year, eventually I expanded to writing outside of that, and eventually I have gotten to this point where I can't stop. So I do a lot of writing in my spare time, and I do a lot of reading, mostly in order to keep myself fresh with writing. I do love stories. It is a little bit more of a hassle for me to read. Honestly, it's easier to watch TV because I do work full time.
Yeah.
And so it's just easier to watch TV. But when I do get to read, it's kind of it's a chore because it's mentally taxing. But it's also really, really nice because I get to experience the way that other authors do things, and I like to see the little nuances of language and plot twists and foreshadowing, and it's just really fun. I'm also obsessed with the podcast Writing Excuses, which anybody who's interested in any of this should also go out and listen to that.
I listened to it first. It's shorter and better than our podcast.
It is shorter and way better. But Bryan actually introduced me. Bryan introduced me to Writing Excuses about 2 years ago. So I think
I introduced Bryan to Writing Excuses about 2 years ago.
Yeah,
look at that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic podcast. Absolutely, 100% check it out.
I think that's probably where the inspiration for this one kind of came from. I think both of ours is definitely very, very similar to that. So definitely good. But yeah, I'm more of a writer than anything else, but it's great to keep the fuel going.
Yep. So you've had a lot of changes in where you're living and what you're doing now. So what's kind of going on with your life, and what are you trying to do writing wise alongside that?
Sure. I started in Houston with the Kelly boys, which is funny because I didn't know either of them when I lived there. Moved to Florida, moved back to Texas about 2 years later, and I am now living on my own for the first time. Woo! And I'm working full time. I'm not currently working as a writer, but I'm working towards that. So we'll see how that changes in the future. But yeah, it's going pretty well. Right now I'm working as an admissions op for a company, which means I'm on the phone all the time. So I have a perfect voice for this, apparently.
Exactly. You practice for podcasting, for
Exactly. That's what it was. It was a year of practicing for podcasting.
Yeah, I did that too. It's called Disembodied Voices. You can find it on the internet.
I knew that was good for something.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. Yeah. I think we're all pretty comfortable at this point, talking for extended periods of time to people while being recorded.
Oh, we'd better be. Our lives would be a waking nightmare.
Exactly. So that's really rad. I think that's a pretty good introduction. If anyone's listening to this and wants to know anything else, excluding my social security number or something,
you can have mine. I'll roll the dice on that.
Email us a question and we can try to cover anything we might have missed. Okay, so jumping into more specific for this podcast, why do you think storytelling is important to humanity or people or culture?
Oh my gosh,
why do you
such
think
a
this is
big
something
question.
worth doing?
So you're starting a theology podcast with the question, does God exist?
Exactly.
If I start a theology podcast, I'm totally going to make that the first question. Yeah.
Do it.
Well, I had an answer.
All right.
I don't have the answer.
I don't think there's going to be one answer.
No, there are 7.
Maybe
How biblical.
I guess the answer that seems apparent to me is that humans are interested in nothing more than other humans. It's the way we see the world almost exclusively, and we oftentimes don't care about anything except there could be some sort of raging chasm of insane bio life going on inside of it, but we'd care about the person next to us more than anything else. It's just how we operate. And stories are how we understand the other humans. We 99% of the time are watching, like we're watching the television show Arrow season 2 because we want to know what happens to all those people.
We don't want to admit that.
Yeah, I was about to say, really?
Openly admitting that TV show got real good.
It gets better for sure. Yeah, it's really cool.
And where the camera focuses on the people the whole time. You know, we just want to know more about other people. We want to understand them. We want to feel their pain. We want to feel their joy. We want to understand other people, where they're coming from, whether it's characters or authors. So that's, I guess that's the big reason we tell and accept stories, because we want to know more about other humans.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something else I've heard and have come to learn kind of from a more psychological angle is people, a lot of what they do internally is kind of create their own internal narrative about what's going on. It's kind of how we cope with things and how we understand things and relate things to each other, is we kind of create our life of chaotic or random events or whatnot and kind of put them into a story, and order them narratively. And I think being able to relate with other stories really helps us do this and kind of keeps us on track, and also helps us understand the world a lot better and our place in it. Because if you can see yourself as a character in a story, it gives you a lot more purpose than if you just kind of see yourself as there.
That's really true. I've kind of heard that viewpoint tossed around a bit, and I guess it makes it in a special amount of poetic sense, considering we're all hardwired with a beginning and an end. So
yeah, absolutely. And like, it's one reason that people, you know, can be very hard to change their mind about something, because once they create an internal narrative about something, it can be very difficult to just, you know, give them a fact and have them change their mind about that, because they've already mentally created this entire story about it. So it's just kind of a way that people interact with reality. And so I think it kind of goes to our core.
It's like
it's
you said,
definitely.
Abigail. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say that's definitely true. It's like ingrained into the way we think, because for instance, if you know a lecturer is giving a talk, I've experienced this in my many lectures in college, because I had so many. For those of y'all who know me, that's funny. But in some of the lectures that I've experienced, the only part of the lecture, honestly, is the story that someone tells. Like, there's a hook right at the beginning. They'll tell a story, and then someone will come back and elaborate on that. And the only reason I remember what the professor's talking about is because he related it to a story with a character. Right. And it's just funny that that's kind of the way that our brains are wired to work. It's just the way we remember things. We don't just remember random facts. I mean, some people do because they're robots, but normal people need a little bit more.
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. So we've kind of touched upon, you know, mechanically why stories appeal to us and why people keep telling them. But what do you think the value out of them is?
Again, there are several thousand answers to this
question. What are
question.
some examples of value you get out of storytelling? Like, what draws you to spend so much of your time and your energy and your life investing in it?
For me, it's oftentimes someone is living a life that I don't have, or that I want, or even that. I mean, it's interesting. I'm going to use a TV show as an example of this.
All right.
Back in the day, like, you know, I don't know how long ago, I was obsessed with How I Met Your Mother, like while it was still on TV, which was not that long ago, actually. I basically couldn't stop. Like, I would watch it over and over again. And I tried to figure out why, because it's just a sitcom. It's really, I mean, as sitcoms go, there's a lot of substance, but as stories go, there's really not. And I didn't know why I liked it so much. And I came to the conclusion that I liked it so much just because the characters were there and they got to interact in the way that they did. And there was such community. And the time that I was watching it, I was actually in a point in my life where I did not have that.
Yeah.
And I think it was just kind of this nostalgic thing where I'm basically living their lives instead of living mine, which is a little sad when you think about it. But I often think that, you know, it's just an escape. I was in a certain point in life and it wasn't really where I wanted to be, and you know, I didn't want to do school, I didn't want to hang out by myself, so I oftentimes watched it just to keep from feeling lonely.
I think that's a great
which
point.
is really interesting.
I think that's a great point. And also it's really the model of sitcoms. And if you look for one of the sitcoms that defined the whole genre, Cheers, the theme song And like the motto of that is where everybody knows your name. And it's this idea of creating this really close, like friendly bar you go to that everyone's just having banter and enjoying each other. And it's like this group of friends that I think it's very much creating that dynamic of like, if you don't have that social aspect, it's almost like creating a social aspect for you to be a part of.
Exactly.
And to feel a part of a world. And I think that touches upon one thing, one of the big, most powerful things you can get out of TV shows or movies or just storytelling, which is feeling a part of another world and that escapism. And
I think that's one reason fantasy is so big.
Exactly. And it also points to one of the potential dangers, which you kind of mentioned on yourself, which is like anything, it has that potential to create an imbalance where you become obsessed with that thing or that thing starts to kind of take a unhealthy portion of your life or your attention and kind of draw away from other aspects.
Yes. I actually have a little bit to say about escapism while we're on the topic, if I'm not interrupting you.
Go ahead.
As someone who historically enjoys spending time alone more than the average person, I don't have a lot of friends, and that's kind of how I like it. Like, I really enjoy talking with people, but I only like doing it in limited amounts of time.
Podcasts are perfect.
And so, of course, exactly. And in an hour, I can just turn Skype off and you guys will leave me alone.
Well, I won't, but yeah.
Well, that's true. But and also being really into storytelling, that was a pretty potent combination of escapism, right? That's almost the textbook example. And so for a long time, I tried to figure out if escapism was good or bad. Is it good that I'm spending hours alone in my office writing a fantasy novel? Or is it ultimately bad? Am I only hurting and fooling myself?
This depends. Is it a good fantasy novel?
No, it wasn't even good.
All right, continue.
That changes things.
Yeah, the mentor died, predictably.
That's the Minotaur, because that would also be predictable.
Someday we'll have to do a sideshow about my first fantasy series.
We can read through it and all.
Yeah, well, no, let's not go crazy.
But go
line
ahead.
by line.
Anyway,
your point.
I have kind of come to a personal realization that escapism is good as long as you bring something back into the real world, or you simply combine the two together. So you don't see it as a binary state of running away or facing the facts.
Well, I think you draw upon an interesting point where escapism is interesting if you look at what you find in that world and find and enhance your own world rather than just try to hide from your own world, which I think, that's kind of what you were saying, is that idea of if your life is in a horrible place right now, you can only run away from it for so long. But it is possible to use fiction and storytelling and ideals from other worlds or other perspectives to bring that back and get a new perspective on your own life and improve that. Which I think is going back to one of the big values you can get from fiction, is this idea of new ideas coming into your consciousness and new people and new experiences and new emotions and so on. And that can have a dramatic effect on improving your own life as you strive to integrate some things or avoid some things that you've read about or watched or whatnot.
I have noticed the more that I read, especially the more that I don't know, I'm not going to say this especially. Anyways, the more that I read, I find the easier it is to understand other people.
Yes.
I mean, because it's going back exactly to that one part that you said at the beginning, talking about how that's how we relate to each other. And I personally believe that one of the biggest problems that people have in this world is they just can't comprehend that there are multiple worldviews. And it's really great to be able to get into someone else's head, especially if they don't share your same thought process. I have had books that I have read that I didn't even know what to do with. I was just like, this is so different from how I operate. And it actually made me question some of the things that I personally believe, which was good. Like, I'm not going to say, I mean, challenge is good, honestly. If my beliefs can't stand up to it, maybe I'm not believing the right things. And so it was really great to have that challenge, because then I got to delve into this topic because this book talked about it. I just got to delve in and answer questions for myself and become a stronger person because of that. So I really, really enjoy reading that kind of material, that actually makes you question who you are or how you relate to something. It's really, it makes you feel stronger. It's great.
That's a great point. And I've totally had the same experience. And I agree, that might be near the top of my list of values you can get from books. or, any storytelling, because honestly, what someone's doing is they're putting their internal experiences or experiences they've thought about from another person's perspective and their collected knowledge into a story. So they're basically creating this vessel for collected knowledge they have either about themselves or other people, and allowing that vessel to be translated to other people in a way that really sticks with them and moves them and makes them think, and not just, facts on a page.
And like you said about constructing the personal narrative, this goes hand in hand with that, because I've definitely had moments where I just don't understand a person. They're just being dumb and rude and not like me. And then I realized, wait, if this were a TV show, or if this were a scene in a movie, and that person over there was one of the lead characters, even though I didn't like them in that show, I would probably be rooting for them in some way, because I know what they're going through, and I know the way that they are thinking is important to them. But you don't really get that since you're trapped inside your own head all the time. Going into fiction kind of gives you a chance to get out of your own head.
And that's an interesting point, is that fiction, really reinforces that idea of multiple perspectives. Is in one book or story, you could have this basically the same character, the character type, as another book or story, and in one they're a villain, and in the other they're a hero. Like, you can take the same viewpoints and realize that people can portray them as good or portray them as bad, which makes you realize that, your perspective is limited. And so as you search for what's right or wrong or what to believe, you need to understand that you're seeing one slice of it and need to take into account the other viewpoints that could be out there.
That is a good point.
Hit the nail on the head right there.
So does anything else jump to mind? Value? I mean, what about just like the fun aspect of it?
We got real deep there for a minute, but
well, here's an interesting value, I guess, that is storytelling. One of the classical reasons was simply teaching morals or even spreading warnings. So if you look at a lot of the older stories, there are fables about, women catching their sleeves on fire and dying. And these are these are in the same era as the Little Red Riding Hood, the Snow White. Like,
most of those are pretty disturbing.
Exactly. They're really disturbing, but they were told as warnings, don't go in the forest by yourself. That's stupid. Like, come on, Red. But yeah, so a lot of them were actually just practicality. Don't promise your firstborn to
a random magical creature.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's interesting. And I mean, of course, there's a lot of fables and parables and such that are literally just created for teaching. So that's kind of a practical aspect of it. I mean, most of the time nowadays people don't like that if they can see that there's a moral behind it. It sounds like preachy. They don't really like
allegory.
I was going to say algorithms. I love algorithms. But
that's robots.
It's interesting. Point. And you can actually kind of see the development of humanity in that. Like, just the way that our art form has changed. It's really interesting.
And that idea has fallen out of vogue, but I think it's still around, but more subtle.
Exactly.
My Little Pony.
Maybe you would agree with me. Okay, that's not subtle, but
subtle.
Yes. But maybe you would agree with me, Stephen, that modern ideals are kind of being taught this way. We've been watching I've been watching a little, you've been watching a lot of Mad Men recently, which is a show that came out some years back that's about people in advertising in the 60s. And I think that show, by portraying the 60s how it is really speaking against certain cultural aspects at the time, like the sexism and the racism and those different elements that existed back then. So I feel like they're still kind of teaching a moral with that show. They're still making societal points, even if they're not being really obvious that, like, their characters aren't acknowledging it. The story isn't acknowledging it, but they're portraying the story in such a way and focusing on the story in such a way to show you these flaws that existed and that I'm guessing they would extend and say still exist in society today.
And the teaching method is less using characters as how people oftentimes see it as, like, kind of cold pawns in a moral teaching session, but rather the characters are making mistakes and living life and struggling with each other to figure out what to do, and in doing so teach you stuff.
Yeah, but even if they're not specific morals, like you see the same values reinforced in story after story after story, be it just being honorable or, you know, the hero rising against the villain. Like a lot of stories have a lot of implicit morality that come from society that isn't even obvious, but is definitely there.
Just everyone kind of agrees, oh yes, of course that's the right thing to do, just in general, because we are of this culture and society. You know?
Exactly. So even when the author isn't realizing that they're telling a message, they're still putting a message in there.
Well, you can't really help doing that either, which is great. Who you are just comes out in your writing. And I think that's kind of cool, because then you get to see a little sneak peek into an author, and just kind of the way they think. It's kind of fun when you especially know the author outside of that. So I watch a lot of John Green's videos on YouTube, and then going in and reading his books, and you're just like, yep, this is John. I can see him all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of cool.
Example. Yeah, that is a great example. So what are some of the more fun aspects that you enjoy storytelling? Like recreationally, what do you think you get out of this that you just don't get out of other things?
I think that, well, I'm gonna put this to books specifically. Books as opposed to movies and TV. Movies and TV are great, but what I like about books is that I can control everything when I'm reading. Because books, I mean, all media is created for the consumer. And I'm going to use Hunger Games as an example, because this is my classic example of this. The Hunger Games book, to me, was most definitely rated R. It was really graphic, and it was really intense, and there were a lot of things in there that little kids just shouldn't be exposed to. However, the movies, I mean, of course it's written for 13-year-olds, and so when the movies came out, they had to be PG-13. So it was really interesting for me to read the book, and I'm seeing like people's faces explode, and then I get to the TV screen and people are just kind of falling over and they look like they're asleep, and I was just like, what? And it works the other way too. Like I've seen horror movies where, you know, there's all this grossness everywhere and terrible things happening. But then when it's a book, my mind, just because it doesn't go there, it tones it down a bit. And so I've seen that happen. So when, especially comparing a book to a movie, oftentimes I think people are dissatisfied with the movies because they have already created the story in their head, and they know what the characters look like, and they know, you know, how everything happens. They know exactly the position of the table that these two characters are sitting at. And then when they see the movie, it's different. And it's usually hard to cope with. So I just think that's cool that books have that quality where you can just create your own imaginary world. It can only really get as intense as you make it. And it feels like there's a lot more control over that. So I think that's a fun aspect of books in particular. That's one reason I like them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, because I think it's also been, researched that the mind is way more active when reading a book than when watching a movie or a TV show, because it's actually requiring some creative input from the person reading. Because you're having to kind of create a construct around, you're basically giving a blueprint that you're filling in with your mind, which is really interesting. And I think it is kind of a unique aspect of books. I can't think of another type of storytelling that really gets that across. Most other storytelling is taking this idea and, you know, adding to it, adding more visual or audio elements to what you have there. That is one reason I also like to work with audio and radio, is it continues with a lot of that. Like if you make an audio drama or a radio drama, you're giving kind of the bare bones sound, and people are having to imply what's going on from that sound, which works especially well for humor. Because I think there's a lot of humor that can come from the unsaid that you're inferring from the audio, which is really fun to work with. Something else I think is really nice about books, especially, is that low barrier to entry means that so many more people can create such more personal experiences by writing books than they could having to fund a movie or a TV show.
There's a reason that everyone wants to write their big fantasy novel, because I can do anything. I can just say something.
You can finally make your imagination come to life.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have skill to make it feel real or feel memorable or get the right emotion across. But you can just say, the dragon swept across the sky and scorched the earth with his talons. And it's like, oh, okay, he has big fiery talons and he's scorching the earth. It just happened. You can't say it didn't.
Yeah, like,
just wrote it down.
TV shows especially are just like, oh shoot, the interesting show got canceled, of course, and now we're seeing more of the same crime drama on network TV over and over again. You know, you really have to hope. And TV shows going through a golden age, but even then there are only so many of them out there. But with books, there's like a limitless supply of creative ideas being created at all times, just because the barrier to entry is so incredibly low.
Yeah, and I guess I'm kind of hopping off to a different little aspect of why storytelling is fun, but I think my favorite part of it, and what maybe a lot of people would agree with, so I'm not saying this is a unique position, but it's the idea of a cast. I love a cast of good characters.
So you love it when like someone breaks their arm. It's like the best part of the story.
So fun. I like doing the breaking.
Nope, that's not what I meant at all.
All right.
It's just fun to see characters grow and change to interact with each other. Just wondering which ones will fall out of the story, which ones will come into the story. It's like it's kind of like you were saying, Abigail, when you were watching How I Met Your Mother. It's just a group of friends, essentially. They're not always going to be friends exactly, but it's just fun to see that group grow and shrink. It's why I love Joss Whedon stuff so much, because
he does
that's what he excels with. The cast of Buffy, the cast of Firefly,
the Avengers.
Even the cast of the Avengers. Like, he turned them into a group of... I just love seeing characters lined up, whether in your mind or on the screen, and you see their silhouettes, you see their personalities, their colors, their choices.
I think that's one reason superheroes are so popular.
Yeah.
They're that concept like brought to ridiculous life. Everyone is so explicitly distinct. Everyone has colorful uniforms. And there's just this like limitless cast that they're constantly interweaving storylines between.
Yeah, and so people will want to draw pictures of them, or they'll want to, have favorites and least favorites. It's one of the purest, most fun senses of escapism that also relates to your everyday life. And I think it's why we were drawn to role-playing so much. And this is a whole new can of worms, but if you don't know, Bryan and I play World of Warcraft, and we role-play in it. We create our own characters, go on a server with thousands of other people, and just tell stories, essentially.
Right.
And one of the big fun parts of that is we have our own cast of characters, and some of them have fallen out of the story. Some of them have if we were even at a point where our entire cast essentially had gotten mixed up and all the original characters who used to be paired off were almost not on speaking terms because these insane plots had just developed without our intention. And it's kind of role-playing, especially as a form of storytelling that kind of distills, because there's very little prose and so on, and just what for the logistics of how it works, it distills just character interaction down to its basis. It's almost more like a stage play. If you read scripts and those sort of things, they're very just focused on dialogue between characters and distilling that concept of interaction between characters. And that is a lot of fun. And I think that's also one reason we're really drawn to TV shows as a medium. Well, it's very much in our blood at this point. You just look at the kind of stories we try to tell. We love audio dramas, which is just, it's just dialogue tags strung together with, pauses and sound effects. There's the role-playing aspect. There's Joss Whedon shows. Even when I write stories, the prose sometimes gets in the way of me just wanting to have characters talk. And for whatever reason, podcasts even, it's what we like to do. So.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. So going on from the benefit of storytelling just in general and the value of it, why are all of you interested in doing a podcast about storytelling?
Because we can't stop talking about it.
There you go. That's pretty much the beginning and the end.
Which is actually really true. All three of us actually have had conversations with both of you separately and both of you together in which I just couldn't stop talking. And especially when we get really fired up about something, it's just really great to share ideas, I suppose, and then get feedback and then get, again, other perspectives. Because that's what it's all about. And it's really, really fun. I like it.
Yeah, that really distills it down, honestly. Like, all sorts of things. Like, we've had several long discussions about Frozen. And it's been a year and a half since it came out. And it'll come up and we'll all have different perspectives on it and talk about it again. Or you'll be writing a book and we'll do 5 different edits on it and just be discussing.
And then there'll be the time where Bryan will say, this line needs to be like this. And then I will say, this line needs to not be like this.
And then I say, I don't know what to do.
And yeah, Steven, I can't even count the times. You'll just be watching Arrow, for example. I watched it before you, and every night you'd watch an episode and come into my office and you just have a discussion about that episode.
It became a ritual to the point where I would walk in the room, you would turn around, I would just say, Arrow. And then it's like, okay, let's do this. Lance was a complete moron in this episode. I don't understand his character arc.
Exactly. And I think all three of us just conversation naturally flows. So we're like, why not, schedule a time out to talk about this stuff, get through some more books that we wanted to read, and then record it and let anyone else who's interested in it also be a part of that discussion.
Well, and from a different angle, kind of a Wales perspective, we want to continue growing it. We've I won't say it's been stagnant, because the ideas the spaghetti ideas
Train
we've
Station
been throwing,
8 has been fantastic. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but it's really our only active show right now. And it's not for lack of ideas. Man, this December, it's gonna get pretty crazy. But one reason I think we wanted to do this was because books were something we had never done. B, books were something that were rarely done in our more video game, TV show, comic book centric circles. C, we wanted to get Abigail on a show, and this is what we all share in common. Like, she's a writer, and we are writers too.
That is true.
And
we also all have eyeballs, so expect the eyeball cast coming.
Yep, we have many things in common. And I don't think I have a D, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, I only have one question left here, which is, why am I still asking questions and not wrapping up the show?
That's a really good question.
Because you're notoriously long-winded.
You know, Brian, a good friend once said to me, brevity is the soul of wit, and restraint is the soul of brevity.
Wow, that guy's ridiculously smart.
He's really smart. And for those of you listening, it was Brian who said that to me. So
you should give him money for being so smart. Oh, shoot.
Let's not.
All right. Yeah, we'll bounce out of here. So we never wrapped this up before, so we'll see how this goes. I'll see if I can come up with any great taglines for the end of this. So to find us on social media and all that, by the time this goes up, we should have all our accounts up, and hopefully this is the correct information for it. If not, Stephen, edit this. Twitter, we're For the Love of Books. Our email is fortheloveofbooks@gmail.com. Our website will be at walesorwales.com/fortheloveofbooks, and we'll also be on the front page of walesorwales.com. Also, look for us on iTunes, and please leave us 5-star reviews if you like us, because that is one of the best ways for podcasters to get notoriety and noticed on iTunes. So if you want to support the show,
all of our friends will listen to us.
Exactly. Yes.
Our friends will listen to us just because they're our friends. But we'll make new friends after that.
There you go.
that is definitely the hope.
So what's the release schedule?
So this is going to be every week. We don't have the set day yet, but we should hopefully have a schedule put in place by the time this goes up. So the schedule is going to be one bookmark episode, then one book episode, and switching back and forth. Speaking of which, our first book is going to be The Book Thief, and I'm sorry, do you have the author for that, Abigail?
Mark Zusk something?
Can you spell it?
No, I can't.
Oh, you don't have it. I'm just going to bring this up.
Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah,
it
cool.
is Z-U-S-A-K. Cut this.
No.
Excuse me, it is Marcus Zusak. Zusak.
All right.
Sounds right.
I'm sorry, Marcus Zusak, if you were listening to this. I butchered your name, but it's because I love you and your book is amazing. So
yes,
there you go.
that has been super rad so far. So that's our first one we're going through. So next week we'll be discussing the first part of that, and that will be the book is really annoying because it has no table of contents, and it also doesn't have normal chapters, which is a terrible choice for our first book. One
reason that it's awesome, though.
It is, but it makes it really frustrating for my for how I'm going to split this up. But I basically figured out the first about 180 pages is part 1 through part 3. So read to the end of part 3, and that's what we're going to be discussing on our first episode. So it's going to be Act 1 of The Book Thief, and hopefully we'll have some interesting things to say about that. Already I do. That book is really really impressing me.
So you're saying we need to read part 1 through 3, and that's all?
Yes. Okay. So part 1, part 2, and part 3, and it should take you to about page 180.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
Or
and
for those of you reading on Kindle, about 33%.
There you go. See, I got that very close. So anyway, that's what we're aiming for. A third of the book each time. It's not gonna be exact. Like, we're basing it after Act 1, 2, and 3, which stories are broken into in terms of narrative flow. But portion is not always going to coincide with that. But it's still a nice.
Not a lot we can do about that.
So you'll want to be reading that by next week if you want to follow us along. We're going to try to, say enough that you'll know what we're talking about but not want to over-explain everything that's going on. And also, there would totally be spoilers. So,
all the spoilers.
Yeah, we're just going to talk about it.
I mean, you might get something out of the podcast. You'll probably get something out of the podcast if you've never read the book, but it's 100% designed to
read along with.
And any book we choose is probably going to be fairly available in e-form.
This one is everywhere. Yeah.
Just at Barnes & Noble. Like, you probably won't have to spend more than, $10, $15 to get any book.
Yeah. And a quick synopsis of it in case you just, don't even know what this is about and want to know whether it'd be interesting. Steve, why don't you go ahead and just give people a quick rundown of what this book is?
As someone who hasn't even read 1/3 of the book so far,
yeah,
The Book Thief is set during World War II. And it is about a girl, but it's not like all of those other books set during World War II about a girl that you've read before, or you've heard about. In fact,
that's practically a genre.
And I just finished an excellent book about a girl who collects books during World War II, and went right into this book. So it's kind of jarring for me. But the narrator is not necessarily who you normally expect, and his prose and sense of colors and space and time is worth the price of admission alone. So
yeah, absolutely. And just for people who are wondering, for this format, for this first season, we're all going to bring one book, and this is Abigail's book. So she's been wanting to read this one for a while, and I can say so far, unless it takes terrible twists later on, this was an excellent choice. So,
and the good thing is, this is also a movie.
Oh, really?
Yes. So once we finish the book, we can watch the movie too.
We should do a special episode about that.
Little comparison. It'd be kind of cool.
That would be really neat. Wow. All right, that's awesome. I had no idea about that. Okay, so to find us personally on Twitter, we're not super active on it these days, but if you want to follow me, I am Lord Meldor, and that's Meldorr. Steven is Stephen Kelly 180, and Abigail is Aimless Hyperbole.
No, I'm the Thinky Reader.
You're the Thinky Reader?
Yeah, it really should be Aimless Hyperbole. Yep.
Sorry, is it at the Thinky Reader?
Yes, the Thinky Reader. Cool. It's from my Thinky Read blog.
You use Aimless Hyperbole for a lot of your social media.
I really do. It's kind of terrible.
So I got that mixed up. So check that out. And finally, anywhere else you guys want people to find you on the internet or elsewhere?
Keep your eyes on Whales or Whales, because we have plans with multiple friends, multiple projects, and just some really cool big things planned for existing shows.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a quick rundown of our different shows at the end here. What about you, Abigail?
I'm just kind of living right now.
Okay, no blogs or something you want people to go to?
No.
Active?
I do have my blog. I have two, aimlesshyperbole.com, which is why he was confused. This is my personal blog. So if you really want a good look into my personal life and my point of view, that's where you go. I also have another blog, thinkyread.com, and that is where you can find my book reviews, book discussions, and they're not really that interesting because it's only one person. But still have them up there, as well as articles about writing and reading, and it's basically the same thing that this podcast is. So go there.
Yep. And like Whales or Whales, you're constantly working on new ideas and rebooting of all these ideas. So if you're interested,
working on getting a fiction section up, it's gonna be awesome.
Yes, if you're interested in Abigail's perspectives, just keep an eye on that stuff, and we'll keep you up to date with whatever she puts out in the future. All right, with all that out of the way, quick thing about whalesorwhales.com, just to intro people who are unaware of it or somehow found this podcast without coming from Whales or Whales to begin with. It's just a creative hub for all sorts of different projects, mostly podcasts right now that Steve and I created about a year ago now. And right now what we have going on there is primarily one other show apart from this one, though we should have a lot of other stuff cropping up at the end of this year. The one we have going right now is Train Station 8, and that is a video game music podcast that Steven and myself do. And we have guests on almost every week from the video game music community. We've had a lot of awesome people come on, a couple of composers from Blizzard, a lot in the video game music podcasting community and just video game music community in general, and so on. And what we do with our format in that right now is every week we take a different single video game song and discuss that particular song, the game around that song, and just what we think about it. And it typically lasts about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how much we have to say. And it's just a more in-depth look at music than you typically find in podcasts, and very laid-back format. We've been enjoying it a lot so far. So check that out if you are at all interested in music and or video games. And that should do it with all the outro stuff. Anything else, Steven, that I missed?
Nope. That's it.
All right, cool. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this first episode. I certainly did.
I loved it.
Oh, thank you. Do you also love books?
Yes.
Excellent.
I hate books.
Wow, we need to maybe rework a couple things about this.
You said that an hour ago.
Sorry,
thank you both
guys,
for...
cat's out of the bag.
Oh, jeez. And it is scratching my face. So with all that said, thank you both for coming.
Hey, you're welcome.
You are so welcome.
I hope to see you here next week in this virtual land of Skype. And everyone listening, until next week, go hug a book.
Oh, no, that's a bad one.
Yeah.
That's a bad outro.
We'll try again next week. All right, bye, everyone.